In August 2002, the British nation was rocked by, to this day, one of the most high-profile and ultimately horrific cases that we have seen this side of the millennium. Two happy, healthy, and most importantly, kind-hearted best friends would go missing, seemingly vanishing out of thin air from a family barbecue in the small town of Soham in Cambridgeshire. Best friends Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman spent the afternoon with family, enjoying the British summer and making the most of the school summer holidays before returning to their school, St Andrew's Primary, for the final year before joining high school. However, one innocent mistake combined with their caring and compassionate nature would culminate in one of the most horrendous situations imaginable. This is the story of the Soham murders. But people, if you are new around here, welcome to Joey and Josh. This channel is growing rapidly at the moment and we are so grateful for all of you guys who are subscribing. If you are not already, please do so and please smash a like on this video. And thank you so much to the members of this channel. So many of you have been joining up for the memberships, which obviously gets you exclusive perks like midweek live streams and episodes dropped up to 48 hours before they become uploaded to the general public. So a huge shout out to all of you. Let's get into the case.
So let's be honest. You've wanted to cover this for a very long time. I don't think he's shut up about it, to be honest with you. This is one of those cases that you said to me, if we're going to do this channel, we're going to do this case. And I was like, all right, mate, fine.
From the opening bell, I said that the Soham murders was something that I wanted to do. Do you remember what the first ever piece of conversation that me and you had regarding this case was?
No idea. Tell me. I don't remember information like this.
It was a bit of like dark trivia that I gave to you, and Brian was there at the time, that would have blown your mind because you'd have never known this.
Okay.
I said to you...
Can you say this now, or is this going to spoil anything?
No. It doesn't. Not really that related to the case or anything like that. But obviously, Brian's a Newcastle fan. For those who follow football, Newcastle's starting goalkeeper and goalkeeper of, well, one of the goalkeepers of England's national team is Nick Pope. And I said to you, did you know that Nick Pope was in the same school class as Holly and Jessica, the two girls that were tragically murdered in Soham all those years ago?
How did you find this piece of information out?
I've got no idea. Like,
do you know it's true?
Oh, it's true. It's 100% true. Yeah, but you know, they called it the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
The rabbit hole was invented for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And back then, before I was taking...
Above your bedroom, it's called the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Before I was taking boxing too seriously, the rabbit hole was specifically invented for me when I was probably doing a load of edibles at the time or something like that. But either way, it's not really a case that, you know, you're going to get many laughs out of this one. It is horrific. Do you want to run us through the sort of timeline of events that happened, Josh?
Yes, because I think with this case, I think there's so much that goes on. What I want to do is sort of run through from when suspicions were arose, from the missing moment, up until the point that they find two bodies. The date is Sunday, August 4th, 2002. The last photograph of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman is taken at 5:04 p.m. as they left a family barbecue at Holly's house. At approximately 6:15, Holly and Jessica left the Wells residence to go and buy some sweets from a vending machine. They walked past the house of a certain caretaker, Ian Huntley. At around 6:30 p.m, a member of the public who knew the girls very well saw them crossing Sand Street in Soham, which is the last definite sighting of the girls. Jessica Chapman's mobile phone was then completely switched off at 6:46 p.m. At 8 o'clock, Holly's mother, Nicola Wells, went to her daughter's bedroom and discovered that both the girls were missing. Minutes after the girls' 8:30 curfew, Nicola Wells phoned the Chapmans to see if the girls were there, only to learn that Leslie and Sharon Chapman were also worried because Jessica had not returned home. At 9:55 p.m, Holly and Jessica were reported missing to the police by their parents. and a police search was fully initialised. The next day, Monday, August 5th, 2002, the search for the missing girls absolutely gets into action. At 9 o'clock, the police issue a public appeal expressing their concern for the girls. The police revealed that Jessica had her mobile phone with her when last seen, but signal tests only indicated an imprecise location within the Soham area. The parents of both the girls held a press conference to appeal for the public to give them help in finding their daughters. The next day, Tuesday, August 6th, 2002, England football captain David Beckham, who was the name on the girls' Manchester United shirts, which were famous up and down the country, made a televised appeal for their safe return. Wednesday, August 7th, 2002, detectives announced they feared the girls had been abducted. Family and friends held a vigil at St Andrew's Church in Soham, where approximately 450 villagers said prayers for the girls' safe return. Newspapers offered over £1 million in a reward to find the girls safe and sound. On Thursday, August 8th, 2002, detectives released CCTV pictures showing the two girls. The footage showed them leaving a local sports centre at 6:28 p.m. on August the 4th. On Friday, August 9th, 2002, computers were seized from the girls' home and it resulted in a number of lines of inquiry. On Saturday, August 10th, 2002, police staged a reconstruction in Soham of the girls' last known movements. Two men were arrested for allegedly refusing to cooperate with the inquiry, but police stressed that this was not considered a significant development. Detectives also reiterated their belief that the girls were still alive at this point and suggested this reconstruction could yield a vital clue. Thursday, August 15th, 2002, Scotland Yard detectives were called in to review the way that Cambridge police had conducted their search, which is way earlier than it would normally be expected for them to get involved. Jeremy Thompson, a Sky News journalist, goes up to Soham to do a full day's presentation. He wanted to do a timeline of the last movements of the girls himself and conduct interviews with various members of the public who knew the girls. Then the police found the charred remains of those famous Man United shirts, and that was on the 16th of August. The day after that was the day that they found two bodies in a ditch that had been left there completely charred, and then this is where the story really begins. Two bodies presumed to be Holly and Jessica were found in a shallow grave around 20 miles away from the town of Soham.
So obviously the viewers at home that followed the case, that remember the case, maybe some that are younger and have learnt about the case since, will know that by the time the two bodies were found, there was obviously a prime suspect. But for those who don't know, Soham, where the two girls went missing from, right, it is a very small town in what we would sort of class as the countryside, or at least me and you living in London would class as the countryside. It approximately had about a population around that time of 7,000 residents, which is really not a lot. It's really not a lot, right? Like, I live in a town called Epsom, right? We've got, I think, a population, or at least an official population, of about 80,000. If I walk down Epsom High Street, I feel like I know everyone. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's a small town in Surrey on the outskirts of South London, right? So to say a population of 7,000 residents, that shows you that that is a small town. And if you look at Soham on a map, you might go, oh, hold on, that looks quite big, you know, like probably a 1.5 mile radius, something like that. I spent a lot of time as a child, right, in a village called Docking, which is in Norfolk, East Anglia. Closest sort of big town that's maybe a little bit well known to this village, Docking, is Kings Lynn in Norfolk. Soham, very, very similar. We actually drive through Soham when we're making the commute to Docking, right? And visually, it's similar, and layout-wise, it's similar. So although Soham might look like it's a bit bigger than it is, what I'm trying to get at is it's actually very densely populated in terms of where the houses are and where people are living, because in those sort of villages and small towns, which are almost like villages, if I'm being completely honest, you're never far away from big sort of woods, rural areas, big farms, and just large patches of land, which means that there's, you know, in some cases, this village I'm talking about, Docking, it's half the size of Soham, and there are literally about 4 streets that people live on, basically, is what I'm saying. So very densely populated, being that it was a hot summer's day, being that it was the weekend, and that means that most people would have been off work, the initial line of thought to police would be whoever has abducted these girls, because I think it's quite clear, isn't it, that this has got to have been an abduction.
Yeah.
After the passing of a week or something like that, and they've had a chance to go through with sniffer dogs and look through all of these rural areas that I speak about, and there's no sign of anything, they start to realise that this is an abduction. And I think it would be hugely difficult for someone who did not know the girls to be able to have abducted them. So the first thing that police always do is what?
They look at the family. They look at people that are closest to the girls. And the key thing with this is they ruled the family out pretty quickly, didn't they?
Well, they were having a barbecue, mate. So every single one of them had an alibi.
Yeah.
Every single one of them had an alibi, and every single one of them had multiple people, probably between, I don't know, if you include children that were there as well, 10, 15 people, maybe 20 people or so, that would have all been able to vouch for each other. So very, very solid alibi. Couldn't have been the family. And because it was obviously a densely populated town, if there was a sign of a struggle, if there was a commotion, if there was screams or anything like that, you would imagine on a hot summer's day like that, when people are either out in their front gardens, back gardens, they're off work, there would have been witnesses. There would have been people that had heard things, and obviously there weren't. And that was why it was so firmly believed that the girls were taken by someone that they knew.
So if you're ruling out the family that quickly, mate, there must have been a litany of other suspects that the police were looking at. Can you let me know who they were?
Yeah, there was hardly any, to be honest, if I'm being completely fair. There were reports that the 2 girls were seen the next day.
Yeah.
Right, in their Man United kits. Someone had phoned up police and reported that. There was also reports of a white van around 10 miles away from Soham, which when you get to these areas, 10 miles isn't actually that far. Like the next village on from the next village will sometimes be like 7 miles, things like that. But when you're bombing it down these country roads, it's 10 minutes in the car, right? So 10 miles away, a van acting suspiciously. Actually, multiple people reported this to police. And then there was one report to police that there was an orange car driving along, and the person reporting said that they saw a man driving the car with 2 girls in the car, and it looked like there was an argument or a struggle going on. But this person didn't say that the 2 girls were wearing Man United tops or anything like that. A lot of the time, what you find with these cases, people were trying to be helpful, but sometimes in their want to be helpful, they're kind of actually being unhelpful in a way.
Yes, and for me, the key person in this case that was the most unhelpful was the jogger. Have you heard about this jogger?
No.
There was a jogger who apparently heard 2 girls screaming and called that into police, but only did it 2 days after he heard it. And he also said that he found weird earthworks, or sort of someone, potentially, digging up a body. God. And again, that ended up being some wildlife.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything to do with it. But he got right in the way. But yeah, there was a lot of people coming forward. I mean, this case was national news, wasn't it?
What it comes down to is always going to be the last person to physically see or talk to the girls, and it wasn't anyone that was part of the family, anyone that was at the barbecue. It was actually the local college or secondary school caretaker, Ian Huntley.
Ian Huntley here is a familiar figure. Evening, Ian. You're the school caretaker. The girls, Jessica and Holly, would know you, and they saw you on the front doorstep. What went on?
I don't know the girls. I stood on the front doorstep grooming my dog down. She'd run away and come back a bit of a mess. They just came across and asked how Miss Carr was, as she used to teach them at St Andrews. I just said she weren't very good, as she hadn't got the job. And they just says, please tell her that we're very sorry. And off they walked in the direction of the library over there.
So there you see him, old Ian, there. Did you know, right? I'm guessing that's the first time you remember seeing the face of Ian Huntley.
At the time, yeah, absolutely.
Did you know that wasn't the first interview that he did in regards to Holly and Jessica.
What was the first interview you did? I mean, that's the one that everyone says is the first interview.
That is the one that's
and that's the one I remember.
That's the one that everyone remembers. That's the one that's regarded as the first interview. But there was a reporter who actually spoke about his experience interviewing Ian Huntley a few days earlier.
First thing that seemed strange, I remember quite distinctly, was that I asked Maxine if at school they'd done stranger danger. Ian Huntley jumped in straight away and he answered the question. He said that he thought Holly would probably get in the car and quietly go, but Jessica wouldn't. She'd put up a real fight and put up a real struggle. But when we asked if we could photograph Ian Huntley, that was the third thing that was very strange. He simply adamantly wouldn't be photographed.
So put yourself in the reporter's shoes. Would you have found that suspicious if he was acting in that way?
I don't know, because I think in hindsight it's easy to find everything suspicious, isn't it? But at the time, small town, obviously, as I say, I spent a lot of time during my childhood in a village called Docking, right? And I understand that, like, mate, someone gets a local bucket stolen and it would make the local newspaper there, like nothing ever happens, you know what I mean? So for a media frenzy to be whipped up in Soham, it must have been like a whirlwind for people. So the fact that he didn't want his picture taken and stuff, and the fact that he asked, you know, would this just be local press and stuff like that, a little bit weird, definitely when two girls have gone missing, but it wouldn't have been alarm bells for me. However, the reporter that you spoke about that was sent there from Sky News, what was his name again?
Jeremy Thompson.
Jeremy Thompson conducted an interview with Ian Huntley's girlfriend, Maxine Carr. Now, Maxine Carr obviously knew the girls more well than Ian Huntley did. Ian Huntley said he didn't really know the girls, but Maxine Carr definitely did know the girls. And the girls were very fond of Maxine Carr. She had been employed as a teaching assistant at their school, and at the end of the summer holidays she was set to find out whether or not she got the job, and this is what Maxine Carr had to say.
They're ever so funny, they're brilliant, they're kind to everybody, they wouldn't say a bad word about anybody, and they love their families and everything, which is why nobody believes that they would ever run away.
Tell us something about this card you're holding.
This is something I'll probably keep for the rest of my life, I think. It's what Holly gave me on the last day of term. She just gave me this with a poem on the inside. We'll miss her a lot and we'll see her in the future. And that's the kind of girl she was. She was just lovely, really lovely.
That's really very sweet, isn't it?
So she uses the past tense, Joey. Do you often talk about people in the past tense, how they were? Like, I mean, when I'm talking about you, I often go, Joey was a great guy.
Yeah.
He was a top podcaster.
Top shagger.
And I really enjoyed making the content with him when he was around.
Well, I think there's two ways you can look at it, right? You can speak about someone in the past tense when they are still alive. That doesn't mean you can subconsciously feel like someone might be dead, right? And this interview's taken a week or so after. Statistically, if someone doesn't turn up within a week or so, or if a couple of people don't turn up within a week or so, statistically, they are usually dead, right? So subconsciously, you could have the hope that they're alive, but the feeling that they might be dead, and you could speak about them in the past tense. Also, I speak about people that are alive in the past tense that I no longer have a relationship with. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So let's say me and you stopped speaking today, and then we didn't speak for a year. I would go, oh, mate, we used to have such a laugh. He was such a good laugh, blah, blah, blah. Do you know what I mean? So I do think that you can speak in the past tense. But do you know what, to me, was more revealing from that interview?
Go on.
It was the part when Maxine Carr said, I'll probably treasure this now for the rest of my life. And I thought, well, if you're holding out any hope that these girls are alive, why would you treasure it? Because let's say, for example, these girls go missing for a week or so, right? They turn back up. I'm sure in the months, maybe even years that follow, you might treasure that note, that poem or whatever it was that one of the girls have written for Maxine Carr. But for the rest of your life, I'm not so sure. My uncle, when he died, he gave me a watch. It wasn't a valuable watch. It was what do they call it?
Commemorative.
Yeah, no, they have a word for it, but something that is valuable to you because of the emotional connection that you have for it, but it's not valuable to the general public and whatever. Because he had passed and he used to wear that watch on his wrist, it is something that I treasured for the rest of my life. Yeah?
Yes.
Or until now.
Yeah.
But had he have not passed and he had just given me it, maybe I wouldn't treasure it for the rest of my life.
Yes.
Do you see what I'm getting at there?
Yes.
So that was something that concerned me. But now I want to bring you back to the reporter that said that Ian Huntley was very reluctant at first to have his picture taken, to be videoed, to basically have himself put out in the media. And I want to tell you why Ian Huntley was reluctant to have himself seen in the media. And by doing so, we need to delve deep into Ian Huntley's past. So Ian Huntley was born to parents Kevin and Linda in Grimsby, where he grew up and lived for most of his life. He is said to have been a small and vulnerable child who wasn't very academic and didn't really socialise very well. Now, despite being older, many people said that Huntley lived in the shadow of his younger brother Wayne, who was more popular and just generally more comfortable in his skin than Ian. Not only this, but Ian was apparently teased at school, but really became the victim of bullying after an incident when he came into school and convinced the whole class that his father had passed away. The only problem was his dad hadn't died. He completely made the whole thing up, and therefore the students that at the time had took pity on Ian Huntley and comforted Ian Huntley were very quick to turn on him, and from that point the bullying got even worse.
Didn't you hear something about his old man? Didn't you hear what he got up to in the bedroom of his home?
Yeah, his dad was a dirty dog by all means. So Ian Huntley caught his dad allegedly in bed with him and his brother's babysitter, right?
Yeah.
Now Ian was 13 at the time. Mate, the babysitter was 16 years old.
So are we saying like father, like son?
I'm saying whether or not it's legal, in my eyes, you're an nonce. You're a nonce. If you've got a 13-year-old son and you're in bed with a 16-year-old girl, you're a nonce. The dad apparently threatened Ian to secrecy, and said that he couldn't tell his mum, and that if he did, he'd be violent with him and whatnot. So Ian definitely had a troubled childhood growing up. As I say, he wasn't academic. He left school with 5 GCSEs, worked various low-paid jobs. And by the time he's 20 years old, right, he marries 18-year-old Claire Evans. Now, to say this one was a whirlwind romance would be an understatement, because he proposed in under 2 months of first meeting her. What does that remind you of?
It reminds me of a certain young gentleman who we made a video about called Mitchell Quay.
Very much the Mitchell Quay method, the love bombing, proposing straight away, really, really getting in there very, very quickly. However, Evans became very aware very soon of Ian Huntley's Jekyll and Hyde personality, and literally within months of them marrying, he started to beat her, he started to mistreat her, to the point of her leaving. Now, she had a lucky escape and she was able to get away from Ian. Another kind of just weird scenario about this is she fell out of love very quickly with Ian Huntley and fell in love with Wayne Huntley, Ian's brother. So she not only left Ian, while being still technically married to Ian, developed a romantic relationship and got together with Wayne Huntley. I tried to do a little bit of digging on this. I've got no idea whether or not they're still together, whether they had children together or whatnot. But again, you can see another event that probably played its part in really, really messing the mind of Ian Huntley up. Now, after this breakup, right, Ian began to target younger women. And when I say target them, I don't necessarily mean violently. I don't necessarily mean in a sinister sort of way. But I think that he started to realise that he was a manipulator, he was a controlling person, and he was someone that very much liked to sort of have that control over his partners.
Assert power.
definitely assert power over those partners. And he pretty much realised that younger girls were just easier to abuse and to be able to get his sort of sexual gratification through doing so.
So basically, this period that you're talking about started between August 1995 and it ran until May 1996. In that time, he had sexual relationships with at least 4 underage girls. 3 of them were 15 and 1 was 13. All of the girls saw Huntley as their boyfriend and brushed off offers of help from social services after worried parents raised concerns. I had heard that one of those girls actually ended up getting pregnant and having the baby. She was lucky enough, wasn't she, to sort of escape the Huntley sort of ecosystem and get away from him, wasn't she?
Yeah. She became pregnant at the age of 15, this woman, and wasn't known to the public until much later. Now she is. We'll probably speak about her a little bit later on. But yeah, she was quick on her feet, quick thinking, and ensured straight away that Ian Huntley was to have no contact with her daughter. Now, in April 1998, Huntley was arrested on suspicion of raping an 18-year-old woman. He admitted to engaging in sex with the woman, but claimed that the act had been consensual and he was not charged. Just a month later, Huntley was charged and remanded in custody at HMP Worlds for 1 week after another 18-year-old Grimsby woman claimed Huntley beat her and raped her while she was walking home from a local nightclub.
So all of these cases are mounting up, right? And you'd expect there to be a record of, you know, case after case, woman after woman coming forward and putting evidence against Huntley. But he was never actually convicted of any of these crimes, was he? He never saw a court to actually convict him, did
No, and with the woman that was walking home from the nightclub, right? With that one, she actually went to the hospital and was able to prove, right? So she was able to prove like that Ian Huntley had, you know,
assaulted her.
Assaulted her.
Yeah.
However, you can't prove that he's assaulted you because you can't prove it's not consensual, right? However, it's, you know, it's her word against his word and whatnot. And police determined that there wasn't enough evidence to be able to get a conviction against Ian Huntley in this case because they reviewed footage from the nightclub, CCTV from the nightclub, and saw what they called it, their wording was that she was socialising in the nightclub with Ian Huntley. Now, again, open to interpretation, because if this woman, right, was all over Ian Huntley in the nightclub, if she's kissing him, if she's seen leaving with him, if she's seen pulling his arm and walking out the door and something like that, it still does not mean that she has given him consent, and therefore he still may very, very well have raped her, right? However, then you can start to, I believe, see why the police think that, okay, it's going to be hard to be able to convict this man of something if that was the case. However, the fact they use the word socialising, like,
it's a disgrace. Like, let's be honest, it shows the time in which we're talking about here. And I think attitudes would be so differently now. But you have to say, it's another one of those police incompetence moments, this is. Because not only did this guy have a rap sheet, and fair enough, they might not have been keeping records of this, but he's got, you know, accusation after accusation, and a woman has finally come forward, got the evidence to suggest that she has in fact been assaulted, and they still do nothing. It is a disgrace what happened. And this is just, for me, mate, this is just the start of the incompetence that we're seeing throughout the state here. And there are many, many other examples that we'll get to.
Well, mate, in 1998, right, the police are informed that Ian Huntley had assaulted an 11-year-old girl, and he had threatened this girl that if she told her parents, he would kill her mother. He was never charged with this offence. However, 20 years later, when in prison, he actually ended up admitting to that one. He confessed to it. Now, he was accused of another rape in 1999, yet he was given an alibi for that one by a new girlfriend that he was seeing, and that girlfriend was?
You might need to look behind you. It was Maxine Carr.
Yes. So Maxine Carr gives Ian Huntley an alibi. Sounds very, very familiar. Now, by 2001, right, Huntley's proven and alleged criminal behaviour had been reported to Humberside Police on a minimum of 10 occasions and to the social services on 5 occasions. So you know that saying there's no smoke without fire? Well, fuck me, this was like a forest fire, because there's a minimum of 15 accusations alleged against Ian Huntley.
It's getting to this point now, mate, where it's just going to go wild, isn't it? We're talking about people in the street recognising him. I mean, when you've been involved in 10 to 15 cases, there are people, family, that will have known this. They will have known this guy. They would have known him by his name, by the look of him. And by all accounts, it was actually getting quite serious in the Grimsby area, wasn't it?
Mate, the entire community of Grimsby have turned on Ian Huntley by this point. He feared for his safety, and it actually resulted in him losing a string of jobs, because he would get into these jobs that he was doing at the time, and very soon people would go, hold on, you know you got a rapist employed, you know you got a nonce employed, you know you got whatever. And whether it was hearsay or not, and the criminal convictions were there or not, like I say, there's no smoke without fire. And in the Grimsby area, he was getting fired from jobs and getting let go from jobs because they couldn't have such a unreputable character working at their establishment.
So surely with all of this, with all of the feedback that we're seeing, with all of the job losses, surely Maxine, who we've just talked about, surely she's dumped him. Because that would make sense, wouldn't it? I mean, with all of the abuse, I mean, all of the accusations, surely she would have just left.
Well, it would make a lot of sense. But Maxine, at the time, is a young, impressionable woman. And she is besotted with Ian Huntley. And also, it's important to note here that she is a victim of domestic abuse herself. People have recalled seeing Ian Huntley beating Maxine in the street. There was a neighbour of the two of them that I believe lived in the flat below them that said she frequently would hear domestic abuse from Ian towards Maxine. She even recalled hearing Maxine screaming and Ian telling Maxine that she is his and she'll do whatever he tells her to. So Maxine's very much a victim of domestic abuse and being controlled. And by 2001, Ian and Maxine decided that their time living in Grimsby was up, and they then moved to Soham.
So they bedded in quite quickly to the Soham community, didn't they? Basically, Maxine Carr was the first one to get a job. She got a job as a teaching assistant, didn't she, quite quickly at the local primary school. And then I think not a lot of people know about this, because I think a lot of people presume that it's the same school. But Ian Huntley actually ended up getting a caretaker's job at the college and not the primary school. So are we calling that like a secondary school, or is it even older than that?
It was basically from year 7 onwards, which in the UK is what you go into after primary school, and if you're a US viewer, elementary school or whatever. Now, the first question will be, how did he slip through the net?
Yes.
How did he slip through the net?
Yep.
So one of the reasons why would be a credible reference that he got.
Yes.
Who was that reference from?
Well, the reference, mate, was from Maxine Carr. Obviously, she would give a glowing reference about the love of her life.
Oh, great fella.
Yeah, and obviously he got the job very quickly after. Not only did he get the job, did you hear that he was given a house as part of that as well?
Yep, so the groundsman, caretaker, often does have a house near the school. My high school had that. But he did actually, right, have to go through, do they call it a DBS check? The
like
police
vetting.
check?
I think this was before DBS, so this was he had to go through some form of vetting to get it.
Yeah. And because he had never spent, prison time, never been convicted of anything, there wasn't a sort of subcategory in the law at that point where you could look in and go, right, okay, this person's never been convicted of anything, but by the way, he's got 15 accusations of being a predator.
It was actually even worse than that, mate. Not only did that happen, but police forces at the time weren't even communicating with each other.
No.
So you could literally go and move into a different county. I think there were 43 jurisdictions of police forces in the UK. You could literally just go from one to the other, and even if you had all of this background, no one would even know about it.
And this is the thing as well, like I think there's quite a common misconception about this, and there definitely is, because we've posted a short on TikTok about this, and a lot of people are saying, no, it was because he was going by a different name. No, that's not how it works. That's just not how it works. When you get arrested, you can't give the police a fake name. You've got to provide the police with some form of identification. And whether that means spending however long in a cell until someone can get it to you or they end up going back to your residence, you have to give them some sort of identification. Obviously, nowadays, with, mass immigration, things like that, things are a little bit different. But this isn't because he was going by the name Ian Nixon at a time. In the Grimsby area, he was known as Ian Huntley anyway. The whole Ian Nixon thing, he didn't go by that name for that long. So that wasn't why. It was because the police didn't have local police authorities sort of a database almost for them to correlate information on people that had been arrested. And not only that, the school were a part to blame here because he gave references of pretty much all the jobs he had worked at. If they had have looked in to one of those references and had the wits about them to ask why his time at this establishment finished, then those references, those workplaces, those bosses that he had would have told them about his history or about the allegations, and that is why they couldn't have such a sort of hated member of the community representing their establishment. And straight away, that would have led to him not being in a position where he got that job and not being in a position to where he had access to children that were around the age of what we know he desired.
As a parent, this is one of your biggest fears, that a predator, someone that has been accused of several crimes, is in any way involved in your school, anywhere near your school, is terrifying. So the fact that the school allowed this, not only did it bring a change in the way that the school was being run, it brought a change in society as a whole in the UK, this case.
Now, obviously, at the time when we were following the case, and I actually remember following the case closely and whatnot, me and my parents would sit and watch the news. It was the worst kept secret in Britain. Everyone knew that it was Ian Huntley, I believe, at the time. But there wasn't enough evidence there. And obviously the key thing was that he had a solid alibi, didn't he? He
did. And the alibi obviously came from, again, this person that always gives glowing references to Ian Huntley. It came from Maxine Carr. She said that she was in the same location. They were at home together and that they spent the evening together. And they'd seen the girls. They'd let them pass on and they moved on. As Huntley said in the series of interviews that he did, he always said they went on and carried on their evening. And that was the story that they gave.
So Maxine actually didn't say she had seen the girls. Maxine said she was in the bath at the time. But she went into vivid detail about the dinner she cooked, peeling roast potatoes, everything like that. And at the same time as this, obviously, police are getting very suspicious. Now, when they call Ian and Maxine in for one of the interviews, they do a forensic sweep of the house, right? Because at this point, suspicion is at an all-time high. Everyone watching it is going, it's that fella, it's Ian Huntley that's done it, right? But there's no proof, there's no evidence, he has an alibi. Then, when they get to the point when they can do a forensic sweep of the house, you're thinking, right, here we go. Now they're going to get their proof. Josh, they did not find one single bit of Holly or Jessica's DNA in that house. However, they also didn't find one single bit of Ian Huntley or Maxine Carr's DNA in that house. The house had been completely bleached from head to toe. Now, why? Listen, I know this man's a janitor. That school may have been spotless, okay? Maybe he's got a thing for cleaning. But to not be able to find your own DNA in a house you live in almost raises the suspicion tenfold, doesn't it?
I'm getting Cuddle Cat vibes from this, Joey, to be honest with you. If you're bleaching Cuddle Cat, you're bleaching the rest of your house. This was an unbelievable piece of information. And I think, really, the police surely suspected this just from that. Surely that was a key piece of evidence. Do you reckon they could have used that in the trial against him?
Yeah.
Because, like, a lack of DNA proves something in itself, doesn't it?
Well, it proves that you went into thorough detail to wash your house. Not only that, it was proven that he his tyres replaced on his car, and he had paid extra to do so with a false registration. So the mechanic that did that came forward and said that I think it was the following day after the disappearance that he had the tyres replaced on his car. Obviously, you're thinking the girls were found in a shallow grave, tyre tracks, whatnot, so that's something as well. The car was searched as well, no DNA evidence of the girls in the car, but really, when we see the police interviews, they are a night and day contrast between the way that Maxine Carr behaves and the way that Ian Huntley behaves.
When Carr was interviewed by the police, most of the time she was telling the truth and appeared animated.
Did they do that?
I've asked him 18 times what they said. Did they actually ask for me? Which direction did they come in?
Yeah.
Did they say where they were going? Did they say anything about barbecue? I mean, I've made him feel like a suspect in his own right, really.
So Maxine there, clearly in good spirits. Let's have a look at how Ian Huntley fared during his interview.
Looking at the Man United tops, thinking good taste.
About any of this, Ian, was there any occasion that you actually came into contact, physical contact, with the girls?
Physical contact?
The cognitive load is apparent when he's asked a simple question about what one of the girls looked like.
I'd say blonde hair, shoulder length, very slim.
Knowing that the slightest slip-up could give him away, he physically shuts down for over a minute as his mind struggles under the pressure.
I can't remember anything else about it.
So watching that, mate, I do think this is the period of time where we know that the walls are closing in on Ian Huntley, and he knows that himself, doesn't he?
The amount of time he pauses during questions, he puts his head in his hands at certain points. He knows that shit's hit the fan. Actually, after these interviews, they were released. They weren't charged of anything. They were put up in a hotel, apparently separate. And I think that police tried to separate them so that they couldn't sort of coerce a story and whatnot. The thing is, by this point, they've already coerced a story, in my opinion. And obviously, this is where we do a bit of time jumping here, because we've given the timeline of the girls being found, but what we sort of haven't alluded to is the fact that when these interviews are going on, the girls haven't actually been found, have they?
Nope.
And it's during this process of when they're calling him in for interviews, when they're searching the house and whatnot, the charred remains that you speak of are found. They are found in the bins of the college where Ian Huntley worked, where he had actually managed to maneuver police away from. He had told police that he didn't actually have access or keys to the room that those bins were in.
Do you know what the maddest part of this is? The police were based at the school. Did
Yeah.
you know that?
Yeah.
They were literally like based in the car park of the school. And there's a saying in police sort of like rhetoric, you got to clear the ground from underneath your feet.
Yep.
And the police just completely had a brain fart here. They could not see the information all around them, which is just insane.
Obviously, the next day, the bodies are found. Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr are both arrested. And not only that, I'll let you go through the sort of timeline of once the arrest is made, but not only are they arrested, it turns out via phone calls made to the police that Maxine Carr was not in Soham that night, that she said. So the alibi all of a sudden has evaporated into thin air. Maxine Carr was visiting family in Grimsby that night, wasn't she?
She was. And apparently she didn't return to Soham for 3 days after that, I'd heard. Is that right?
I think it was around that,
Yeah. On Tuesday, August 20th, 2002, Ian Huntley was charged with the murder of the two girls. Maxine Carr was also charged with conspiring to pervert the course of justice. She was also later arrested for assisting an offender. And at this point, Ian Huntley starts to pretend that he is going absolutely insane. He starts dribbling, starts drooling, starts making out that he's not fit for trial. He's then sent for an evaluation, and that takes us all the way up to October the 8th, which at that point he was deemed not to be insane and fit to face trial, which happened on November the 3rd, 2003. In the trial, we obviously get to know Huntley's version of events. Why don't you tell me what happened?
Yeah, so Ian basically says that it was all part of one big accident. Holly and Jessica walk past his house. Holly's having a nosebleed. He helps Holly, right? He's the good Samaritan here. He invites her inside, helps and tries to stop the nosebleed. However, when Holly's nosebleed does not stop, she actually falls into the bath that just so happened to be full at the time. In doing so, she drowns, and then Jessica starts to become erratic, at which point Ian Huntley tries to silence her and accidentally suffocates her in doing so. Now, the main thing I would say straight away is, one, this is just a complete load of fucking shit. But let's pretend we are the most naive people on earth ever right now. If she's fallen in the bath, yeah, what the hell are you doing trying to silence the noise coming from the other girl? Because that other girl is your ticket out of jail. She's your witness. She's the only witness that could say, this is what happened. She fell in the bath. So you wouldn't be trying to silence her. You need that girl alive if that is your version of events. So easy for a prosecution or a jury to just debunk that straight away, isn't it?
The fact that the defence have gone into a court in England, and bear in mind, this was at the Old Bailey. It's in Court 1 of the Old Bailey. This is about as big as it gets, right? You're in terms of your media coverage and that sort of thing. The fact that they've gone in with this story is a disgrace for that lawyer. Because quite frankly, they should have come up with something better. But I think he had used this line already earlier on in some of the questioning and that sort of thing when he'd been going into trial. So he had to double down on this lie. But the fact that they're talking about it is a joke. It's such a ridiculous story.
It was laughable that this is what it was. Obviously, Maxine is in court at the same time. She gets very emotional. She actually apparently stands up at one point in court and says, I will not be held accountable for the actions of that monster, and sort of points towards Ian Huntley, who was apparently on the other side of the courtroom. So do you want to give us the eventual verdict on what both were convicted of?
Yes, let's get into it. So the jury deliberated for 4 total days trying to ascertain exactly what happened, and they returned a verdict of 11-1 majority to say that Ian Huntley was guilty of the murders of Holly and Jessica. Therefore, he was sentenced to a life sentence in jail for his crimes. The judge went on to say, you murdered them both. You are the only person who knows how you murdered them. You are the only person who knows why. And he also cast another sentence against Maxine at the same time. She was in court. And obviously, you and I are sat there thinking she's going to have a pretty severe charge. There's quite a lot of stuff that she could have been convicted for. And so obviously we're expecting, I don't know, near enough life imprisonment as well because she was involved in this.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's clear she has an alibi that she wasn't involved in the murders of the 2 girls. But I would say to say she was assisting an offender would be an understatement. I know that's the official wording, the terminology of it. She was doing a lot more than just assisting the offender. Maxine Carr was involved in cleaning and bleaching that house head to toe. She gave Ian Huntley an alibi. She stuck up for Ian Huntley. She knew what Ian Huntley had done. She knew of the accusations of him in the past. And at the end of the day, a victim of domestic abuse or not, once you are in the safe hands of the police, and you can very much see the way that the police are going here, you have no excuse. You are banged to rights here. So I'm expecting Maxine Carr to get charged with assisting an offender and perverting the course of justice at absolute minimum, to be honest with you.
So Maxine was convicted of conspiring to pervert the course of justice, but she was found not guilty of 2 counts of assisting an offender. So that is the more serious crime.
Mate.
And she was found not guilty of it.
How on earth a court have come up with that and been able to decide that she is not guilty of assisting an offender is ridiculous. Now, look, like, she was in Grimsby for a few days, so maybe they class it as, oh, she didn't help him hide the bodies, you know, she didn't help him burn the clothes, things like that.
Bleach the house.
She helped him bleach the fucking house. She went on national TV and lied. She sat there with police and smiled and laughed and lied about the Sunday roast that her and Ian had, all in the knowing that he had done it. And nothing will ever convince me that Maxine Carr did not know what that fucking piece of shit had done.
Well, what about if I told you about the sentence that she got? In total, she was only given a 3.5-year prison sentence. And guess how much time she served out of that 3.5-year prison sentence?
Probably a third, probably half of it.
It's 21 months is the period of time that she actually served. So to say that she got off scot-free is obviously not true, but she got out of prison pretty quickly, didn't she? So do you remember when I said to you about this whole life tariff that Huntley got? Obviously been sent to prison. He got 2 life sentences for the murders of the 2 girls. What I didn't tell you about is that the day before the actual sentencing, because you know what it's like, he's pled guilty in the trial and then you go through to sentencing, the Criminal Justice Act was passed. And that Criminal Justice Act allowed him to effectively avoid the full life charge, because full life convictions are only for people that are sexual, sadistic, or people that abduct children.
Yeah, and this is the thing, right? Because of, and I don't think we've actually touched on this, because of the amount of decomposition of the body, how decomposed these bodies were in this sort of shallow grave in the summer heat, it was a sweltering summer, they weren't able to identify the girls straight away. I think it took dental records and whatnot, and then therefore they weren't able to firmly identify and confirm the actual causes of death. It was most likely from suffocation or asphyxiation, but they weren't able to do that. And being that it was that hard to even identify them, one thing they weren't able to identify or figure out was whether these girls were sexually assaulted. Now, being that it was Ian Huntley, we know that there would have been some kind of sexual motive there, but again, for a court to prove it with the post-mortem not able to prove it himself, you know, you are just going on your own interpretation.
Yeah, the way that he covered up his tracks was serious. Like, he knew what he was doing, and this was a serious level of cover-up. And you have to say, the worst part of all of this, Joey, is that we never really truly understand what happened to those 2 girls. And really, therefore, the families can never really get that closure that they need to be able to understand exactly what happened to the 2 young girls. So I find that incredibly gutting, to be honest with you. So we've done the sentencing. We understand how long these guys are in prison for, a significant period of time, unless you're Maxine. Should we talk about the aftermath? Should we talk about what's happened to Huntley since?
So Huntley now serves his time at HMP Franklin. That's a notorious prison. Loads of high-profile criminals, serial killers, things like that. He's under the same roof as the likes of Levi Belfield, Wayne Couzens, Michael Adebolajo, the killer of Lee Rigby, and many, many more. And as soon as Ian Huntley was sent to prison, he obviously had a huge target on his head. Now, the first prison that he was sent to was HMP Wakefield. And inside HMP Wakefield, Ian Huntley was schooled with water, or scalded, they call it. Basically, prisoners will boil water in their cells. They'll often pour sugar in there, something like that, and they'll throw it over someone. Ian Huntley was rushed to hospital. He obviously had severe burns from this experience. It wasn't life-threatening, but it would have been something that was very, very painful for him. Now, the bad news is that this clear threat inside HMP Wakefield that Ian Huntley was now facing from other inmates meant that Huntley was transferred to HMP Franklin's. The good news is, after serving a couple of years there, the inmates were able to get their opportunity to get their hands on Ian Huntley once again. This time, when convicted armed robber Damien Folkes slashed Ian Huntley's throat. Now, I might be at risk of doing this, Josh, because I don't have the full background check of armed robber Damien, folks. But if armed robbery is the only offence, even if he's got 100 armed robberies, if they're the only offence and he hasn't killed anyone and he hasn't nonced anyone, I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you very much to Damien, folks, for slitting the throat of Ian Huntley. Now, Ian unfortunately survived the attack, but I don't really know how unfortunate that is, because Ian Huntley does not want to be on planet Earth. He's actually had multiple suicide attempts, and one of those suicide attempts came from a overdose on antidepressants. He basically struck a deal with another inmate. Himself and this inmate would both store their antidepressants they were being given. They would probably put them in their gums, make out they're taking them, open their mouth, whatever, take them back to their cell, and they'd be able to store them up. And when it got to a point where there was enough that Ian Huntley felt that he could overdose, he struck a deal with this inmate. The deal was that Ian Huntley would make a confession tape, right? And the other inmate would supply him with the antidepressants to be able to overdose and to be able to kill himself. And when he attempted to commit suicide from his jail cell, ultimately he was unsuccessful in doing so. However, the tape that he promised the other inmate that he'd be able to take with him and when he got out of prison sell on to the media and make money off was released. And Ian Huntley said some truths that weren't said in court in that tape. He maintained that the murders were not sexually motivated, but he did finally admit to purposefully killing both girls. He also said that his girlfriend at the time, Maxine Carr, knew all about it. That was why she assisted him in the cleaning of the house. And he said in this tape that when he told Maxine Carr he was going to hand himself in to the police, she slapped him around his face and warned him not to. Whether this is true or not, we can only speculate. But that leads us on to Maxine Carr. Now, after Carr's little cushy 21 months behind bars after she had helped this sick piece of shit commit the acts that he did and tried to get away with it, she was released into society. Not only that, though, she was given lifetime, Josh has got to say the word because I can't pronounce it.
The word is anonymity.
Anonymity. At the time, she was just one of 4 criminals to ever be given this charge. And at the time of recording, it is reported that over £2.5 million of taxpayers' money has been spent on giving her this disclosure from the public, including her moving from various place to place once the public become aware of who she is. Not only that, to stop them trying to work out her true identity or finding out her true identity, taxpayers' money has gone towards cosmetic surgery for her and dental surgery to change Maxine Carr's appearance. Now, I actually saw a picture that surfaced of Maxine Carr around 2020, and despite the fact that she had dyed her hair blonde and had some work done, I was certain as soon as I saw that picture that was Maxine Carr, right? Now, we've spoken about Reddit before, and you have to take Reddit with not a pinch of salt, a shovel of salt, right? Because Reddit, you know, people can write stuff on there for a reaction, but there was a Reddit article and it read, "They had Maxine Carr living in flats in Sunderland for a while. She was under constant surveillance/protection, with 2 plainclothes police officers following her everywhere she went. There was a small lake near where she lived where kids used to go and play, and you'd see her wandering around there, smiling at people, including their kids. She had never approached them, though, as she knew that cops were watching her like a hawk. More importantly, for her protection than anything else, I would assume. It was a long time ago, but if I remember correctly, she had dyed her hair blonde in an attempt to disguise herself, but everyone could see who it is and would point out that it was her." Now, the reason I say take Reddit articles and Reddit posts with a shovel of salt is because anyone can write them, anyone can literally write anything. However, when I saw this picture of Maxine Carr, where did the person say that the picture was taken?
Sunderland?
It was in Sunderland. This picture was taken of Maxine Carr. And obviously, she had blonde hair in the picture. And a lot of what I've done digging into and looked at was that there were a lot of sightings of her in the Sunderland area. Not only that, there was a seaside town, and I don't know where in the UK this is, but there was a seaside town that at one point, once they were being moved around, these women was said to have homed Maxine Carr, Tracy Connolly, the mother of baby P, and Karen Matthews, the mother of Shannon Matthews. And the residents were furious about that. Obviously, they were separated, dispersed, moved to other places. At the time of recording, Maxine Carr is now married with at least one child. That child would be around 15 years old, and it is said that the child does not know who his mother actually is. Part of the conditions of her, her... What's the word, Josh? You're going to have to give me it again.
Anonymity.
Anonymity is that obviously she wasn't able to tell her child, because until that child is of a legal age where they can be trusted and whatnot, they could then blow the case and, at the expense of more taxpayers' money. However, there are conflicting reports as to whether or not the husband knows about who Maxine Carr really is. My strong gut suspicion would be that he would know who she was. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think after all the case and all the press, I think you'd be weird not to know, to be fair. Even with all the plastic surgery, mate. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You'd figure it out.
Now, I haven't ever read of any, beatings that she's taken in the street or anything like that. I'm sure if Ian Huntley was to ever get out, he would definitely be suffering some of those. But to end on Ian Huntley, one thing that came to light quite recently was that, do you remember the we spoke of where the woman actually went through and she had the child, but Ian was never able to see the child? That child, as she grew up, was told by her mother that her dad was a bad man, and actually she had a partner and she more saw that as her dad. And she had said that, look, it's not your biological father, but your biological father is a bad man. That child actually went on to do a school assignment where she was looking at crime rates in the Grimsby area, and Ian Huntley pops up on Google in an image with her mother, and that's how she discovers that Ian Huntley is her father. She actually writes to him in jail. Do you know about this?
No, I didn't.
She writes to him in jail. And she basically wants to get some answers, and feels like that maybe because it's his daughter reaching out, she'll get some answers. And she starts to build a rapport with him, mostly him asking her questions. He asks her if she's got a boyfriend and things like that. Weird. Yeah, and he's asking her what she's doing and what she wants to do for work and whatnot. And then when she eventually pushes him to speak about what happened, he basically says to her, "I will not speak about the most horrendous day of my life." And that's pretty much where this story ends, Josh, isn't it, really?
Well, can I give you some good news to end the story with? Because like I said at the start, there were some societal changes that happened. There was an inquiry that was held by now Lord Bishard into this case and really wanted to change the way it worked. And we saw and talked about all of the police failings and the failings of the school, and this changed everything. So they did end up bringing in the police national database, which was one of the key issues that I told you about, which was all about communication between and cross county lines, which would mean that some of the crimes or alleged crimes that Ian Huntley had committed would have been passed to other organisations and other police forces, and therefore it might have been an easier way to actually identify those crimes, and hopefully he wouldn't have been ever allowed anywhere near a school, for example. So that is the start of it. And then there also was another sort of like vetting procedure which ended up getting watered down in the coalition government that came after the Labour government at this time, but that again was all about having the right to be able to look someone up online and to be able to identify them, and if they were involved in any sexual crimes or any crimes against minors, again that would be identified very early, and those people wouldn't be allowed anywhere near schools and young people in general. So again, we're talking about what was a incredibly negative crime mate. We're talking about this guy who is a sick individual, and Maxine Carr, again, who helped him, you know, through some horrendous stuff. But the good news from this is something actually changed in the law, and hopefully that means that we're going to see less people like this in and around, you know, kids and people that we care about.
And obviously, we wouldn't be doing it justice if we didn't finish off this episode by paying our respects to the families of Holly Chapman and Jessica Wells. Awful case, and we just hope that the fact that Ian Huntley will never get out of prison, hopefully, is some small shred of comfort to them. Yeah, I think that's where we kind of end this one. But people, if you stuck around to the end of the video, you definitely liked it. So please consider becoming a member of the channel. That means that you will get the videos up to 48 hours before everyone else is able to get them publicly on YouTube. You will get an exclusive midweek live stream every single week where you will actually be able to send in your questions to us. You'll be able to converse with myself and Josh, and there are plenty of other perks coming your way via that membership. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and we will see you all in the next one.